Hi everyone, Samir and Sumit here, and welcome back to our Formula One podcast.
Today we'll be talking about the 2024 Monaco Grand Prix.
Yeah, and while the race definitely wasn't one of the best this season, the podium and the result was certainly up there.
I definitely agree with you on that. I mean, the race was probably one of the most boring Monaco
Yeah,
Grand Prix ever, but
yeah,
the result was one of the best.
yeah. So going into this weekend, one of the main talking points was whether Leclerc could break his home cars finally and take pole and even a win around here, because we know in the past he's been super quick. Ferrari have always gone really well around Monaco, so they just needed that final bit of luck to get them over the line.
Like you said, Leclerc's had past success here in pole position in qualifying in
Yeah.
2021 and 2022, but
Hmm.
it's either been his fault or like his fault of the crash and then unluckiness with the gearbox in 2021,
Yeah.
and then that poor strategy in 2022 that cost him
Yeah.
victory. So this year it'd be interesting to see because their car likes the slow speed nature of Monaco. But
Hmm.
we thought going into this weekend, Red Bull would still be strong, even though their drivers played it down. We thought they were just like usual. Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, it's always going to be a hard weekend. But going into FP1, it looked like Red Bull genuinely were off the pace.
Yeah, and they did say that their car struggled a lot in the low speed corners, and so definitely they had a lot of work to do over these next 2 days to build up before qualifying. Because as we know, this qualifying session is one of the, if not the most important qualifying of the year, because oftentimes where you start in Monaco is where you're gonna finish.
And so the Red Bull struggling in the slow speed and also really
Yeah,
bumpy nature of Monaco. And it looked like Mercedes had that taken advantage of really well.
yeah,
Hamilton looked like he was flying around Monaco.
yeah,
Obviously, he's won 3 times around here, so he definitely knows what to do. And he looked like he was pushing the Mercedes, and he looked pretty comfortable in that car, which was
yeah.
like the first time all season that he seemed comfortable in it. And same with like Ferrari and McLaren too. They look pretty strong.
Yeah, but I mean, as it is FP1, we did see some mistakes happening. We saw Carlos Sainz make a mistake going down into the chicane at the harbor, and we saw Nico Hulkenberg in his Haas running wide at turn 1, 2, along with a bunch of other cars, just trying to field where the car is in the beginning and where they can try to find the most time.
Exactly. Naturally, in Monaco, you try to brake, like you try to push your braking point further and
Yeah,
further. And so a lot of drivers were experimenting with that,
yeah.
especially into turn one,
Mhm.
Sandoval, and it looked like one of the kick Saubers went a bit too far with that. I don't
Yeah,
know who it
Joe
was.
Guan
It
Yu.
was Joe Guan Yu, and he lost a bit of his front wing, which then Charles Leclerc ran over.
Yeah,
So kind of a dangerous moment for Leclerc mostly, as that piece of front wing could have like damaged his floor, but thankfully
yeah.
there was no damage done for him.
Yeah. But while a Mercedes were flying too, Leclerc was also pretty. He was seemed to be kind of off the pace compared to what we've normally seen from him around Monaco. He was only P5, whereas Hamilton and Russell were up there in first and third, and so was McLaren. Piastri, I think we was up there in second, and I think as we would see throughout the weekend, he continued to be one of the best drivers of the weekend, in my opinion.
And their driving was definitely matching that car livery too.
Oh
That
yeah,
Ayrton Senna tribute, really
yeah,
nice livery for the 6-time Monaco Grand Prix winner
yeah.
and former McLaren driver. So
Yeah.
McLaren again, they were on a resurgence after Imola.
Hmm.
So it looked like maybe we could see them challenge here in Monaco,
Yeah.
especially. But again, since Red Bull was struggling, one of their drivers, I think it was probably Verstappen, saying the car was on the knife edge.
Yeah.
It looked like McLaren, Mercedes, and Ferrari were looking like they could take real advantage of that.
Yeah. We also saw traffic seem to be a little bit of an issue here, and obviously traffic is so important, and managing that around Monaco where it's so tight and where there's only a few spots to let people through. So engineers would need to be on top of their game, where letting their drivers know where traffic is, or else serious penalties could be applied.
So in the end of FP1, it was Hamilton P1, and just 29 thousandths away was Oscar Piastri in P2. Then came George Russell and Lando Norris, followed by Charles Leclerc, who was fifth, but he was on the medium tire, while the top four was all on the soft. So that was encouraging from for Leclerc and Ferrari. Then came the Aston Martins with Alonso sixth and Stroll seventh. Then both RB cars, Sonoda ahead of Ricardo in the
Yeah.
top 10. So a good showing for RB, and continually looking like they could increase points, and kind of go on an
Yeah.
upward trajectory. And Carlos Sainz rounded out the top 10 in P10.
Yeah, so now going on into FP2, just another chance for the drivers to see where they would where they could find the limit, and a lot of drivers ran their quali runs during this session because qualifying conditions would be most similar to at this time of day. So and when they ran these simulations, we saw Charles Leclerc top the times. So not for the first time Leclerc looked quickest around Monaco, but surprisingly Hamilton was also up there in P2. So maybe Mercedes actually had some genuine pace. But once again we saw Red Bull were struggling with Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that Leclerc was fastest, but it looked like Mercedes were a lot more consistent at
Yeah.
this moment.
Yeah.
It looked like throughout this session Leclerc was making a lot of mistakes, and he
Yeah.
was obviously trying to explore the limit, but it looked like already like he just pulled out one like great lap that um secured him the P1 spot, which is all you need in Monaco.
Yeah.
But like it looked like Mercedes were more consistent with their performance. So something to think about for Ferrari, but again, it's just practice, and Leclerc was just trying to find the limit, is what I was taking away.
Yeah, but speaking of not being consistent, Red Bull were the team that were not being consistent at all. We saw Perez hitting the wall a couple of times. We saw Verstappen complaining about jumping around like a kangaroo. So he was definitely not happy with how the car was riding over the curbs. And Sergio Perez was just hitting some of the walls a little bit, but luckily no major damage was done. They were just like pure slow.
So they were consistently slow.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah, so anyway, then we saw more drivers making mistakes again,
yeah.
especially the Nouvelle chicane looked pretty bad in terms of mistakes, because obviously that's a
Yeah.
heavy braking point out of the tunnel. We saw George Russell and like Max Verstappen struggling with that, as well as Charles Leclerc too.
Yeah.
So just kind of finding again, trying to push that brake point farther and farther into the corner. And again we saw I think it was Lando Norris as well go wide too. So just drivers consistently making mistakes there. But
Yeah.
just again practice and stuff.
Yeah, one thing to note though is that both the Saubers were like very much off the pace this whole entire weekend. I mean, they were just like they were super slow in my opinion. Like, and just you could tell throughout like through their times that they set in qualifying and throughout the practice sessions, they were just off the pace a lot. And I know they've been struggling a lot this season, but this is definitely the worst performance I think they've had this whole weekend or this whole year because they were just nowhere near even competing with anyone.
Like we saw Valtteri Bottas, the faster one, was
Yeah.
still 2 tenths off Logan Sargent, and
Yeah.
Sargent was running 2023 parts this
Yeah.
weekend because the lack of spare parts at Williams. So just Kick Sauber having a really bad weekend so
Yeah.
far.
Speaking of Sargent too, we saw him run into some traffic with the Ferrari, but then at the last corner at Rascasse, he almost hit the wall. He tapped it a little bit, just trying to straight line it all the way to the finish line. And luckily, there was no too much damage done to his car, but he definitely won't want to do that in qualifying.
Yeah, I think he was experiencing tire issues at the end of the lap, which is
Yeah,
normal because Monaco wears down your tires really quickly. So
yeah.
towards the end of the lap, you'll be struggling.
Yeah, even Albon was complaining about how the car was definitely eating up the tires a lot on the Williams specifically.
So at the end of the session, it was Leclerc fastest, Hamilton again inside the top two. Then came Fernando Alonso third, followed by Verstappen fourth, in an encouraging sign for Red Bull despite all their woes. Then Lando Norris came fifth, followed by Carlos Sainz in sixth. Then came Stroll, Perez, Albon, and Russell rounding out the top 10.
Yeah. So now going on into FP3, just the final chance for drivers to tune their setups and to find the limit and to play around mainly more with just the setup to see how they can dial their car in for qualifying. And we saw once again Charles Leclerc top the times with a very competitive lap time, and Max Verstappen now for the first time this weekend was up there in the top three. He was P2 and Perez was in P5. So whatever worked Red Bull did overnight to find out more about their car and how they can improve it for the rest of the weekend. They definitely worked well because both Red Bulls were definitely where we've seen them throughout this year.
While it was flipped fortunes for Red Bull, it was still the same woes for Kick Sauber. Valtteri
Yeah,
Bottas hit the wall on the exit of the second swimming pool chicane, and
yeah.
that put him out for the whole session. And at a track like Monaco, it's really detrimental.
Yeah, and like especially for coming to qualifying, Bottas won't have that extra bit of time out on track that other drivers are having, especially in that car like that Sauber, where who knows, maybe he might have had a chance anyway, but we don't really know because that car has just been so far off the pace. But it'll just remain as a what if question.
hmm And finally, for this session, we saw Hamilton again. The main highlight again was Hamilton just dialing in his Mercedes, and he looked extremely comfortable. It looked
Yeah.
like this was the most positive he's felt after practice sessions the whole year, and so that was a really encouraging sign for him.
Yeah, he definitely wants a really good result this weekend because he hasn't had a lot. He's kind of been getting beat a lot by his teammate Russell, and like one part of the reason why Russell was so much quicker this weekend compared to him was that um Russell was running a new spec front wing, whereas Hamilton wasn't because Mercedes like kind of rushed out to get this upgrade even to Monaco, so they decided to give it to Russell because Hamilton didn't want to drive around taking the risk with a new part and risk breaking that part, whereas Russell was more comfortable doing that. So that's why Russell was slightly quicker than Hamilton
I think
sometimes.
Hamilton's thing was that he didn't want to have to like in case he broke it, he
Yeah,
would have to go back to an old
yeah,
spec wing and then relearn the car, which at Monaco is
yeah,
really difficult.
yeah,
So at the end of FP3, then it was Leclerc first, followed by Verstappen second. So Leclerc again looking really strong. Then came Hamilton third, followed by Piastri fourth. Then Sergio Perez fifth. So both Red Bulls in the top five. Then came George Russell, Carlos Sainz, Lando Norris, Yuki Tsunoda was ninth. So a really strong effort again from him in the RB, and then
yeah.
Alonso was 10th.
Yeah, so now going into qualifying, the most important or one of the most important qualifying sessions of the year, and I think it's the most important
I think it's
qualifying.
the most, yeah.
So the drivers had to definitely now, the cars were tuned, the tires were put on. Now it's just purely up to the driver in qualifying to just deliver what the team need them to deliver and to get as far up the grid as possible. So going to the end of Q1 now, the drivers at risk were currently the two Saubers who were very much off the pace. Lando Norris is surprisingly down there. Daniel Ricciardo in 17th and Gasly in 16th. Sargent had just put in a good lap time to go up to P14, so he was definitely at risk. And another driver at risk too severely was Sergio Perez.
hmm So Perez, two Monaco Grand Prix winners in the risk zone was
Yeah,
Perez and Ricardo. So they needed good laps. Ricardo put in a lap that was good enough for eighth place, so he would be safe, and he was ahead of Yuki Tsunoda. Gasly
yeah,
also had a brilliant lap in the Alpine as he was seventh. Alex Albon went up to fifth place. So
yeah,
Albon was in a really strong position in the Williams, showing his pace. And while all
yeah.
this was happening, the two Mercedes were at the top, surprisingly ahead of both Ferraris. So interestingly, that could have been a great result for Mercedes if they kept that up into Q3. But anyway, then Lando Norris crossed the line to finish P9. Oscar Piastri went up to P2. So
Yeah.
I looked like Norris made a mistake somewhere because Piastri was significantly ahead. And then Sergio Perez came across the line. Perez stayed 18th.
Yeah. It was so surprising. I don't know what happened because he was he was 5 tenths off Russell's time in P1 and 3 tenths off Verstappen's time, and it was such a tight field spread. But even in the Red Bull, to be that far off the pace compared to your teammates, just it's crazy to think about because you're historically we've seen that car has been so dominant, and to get to a track like Monaco where Red Bull have historically always really gone well around Monaco in that turbo hybrid era. So now it's very surprising, especially Perez has won the Monaco Grand Prix before. So he certainly knows how to put a lap together, but he just wasn't able to do it.
And not only that, but Fernando Alonso was the other
Yeah,
big shock too. So Fernando Alonso just um disappointing for him to win the Aston Martin. He got a
Yeah,
podium here last year, so it'd be interesting to see what would happen with Alonso. But
yeah,
Sargent, on the other hand, has outqualified Perez the same amount of times he's outqualified Albon.
yeah. Sargent showing what he's capable of out qualifying a Red Bull.
Anyway, going on into Q2 now, we saw more traffic in front of Esteban Ocon that hampered his lap, and especially at Monaco, you don't know if you're going to get another clean lap in. So
Yeah,
if you have one impeded lap, that really is annoying for you. So going on to the final run, Stroll couldn't improve his time, and he stayed P13, and he would be out. Lewis Hamilton wasn't improving his lap, but at the end, he managed to go up just one place. Then came Daniel Ricciardo, who needed a good lap, but he only went up to P13, so he would be out, and it would be disappointment for
yeah,
him again in qualifying in the RB. Gasly in the Alpine went up to P5, which was a
yeah,
great lap from him in that what we consider a tractor of a car.
yeah.
And Sonoda, showing what the RB could do, he put it into P9. So Sonoda again just producing a brilliant lap.
Yeah, Sonora's definitely one of the most informed drivers this season. He just always been there, taking a point or two away from each race, which is at the end of the weekend, at the end of the year, could prove to be the difference when it comes to that the fight for seventh or eighth place in the constructors championship. So Sonoda's definitely doing himself a favor, especially with Perez having poor performances, and Red Bull certainly will have their eye out for him.
hmm And so at the end, we lost Esteban Ocon, who got a podium here last year.
Yeah.
Disappointment for him, as well as Nico Hulkenberg, 2018 winner Ricardo, and then Stroll and Magnussen.
Yeah. And we saw Ocon had a huge lockup into turn one, and that's what could have cost him his lap time. But now going into Q3, and Leclerc was certainly on the limit, and he was blitzed the middle sector, and he was looking to go to the top, and he went to the top by 5/10 of a second compared to Lewis Hamilton. We were now comfortably in the 110s, and Albon actually split the Mercedes too, so Albon was up there in P3, but Russell definitely he just put in a cooler of a lap. He needed a good banker lap so that he could do another proper lap and get a more competitive time. And same thing with Gasly because they were nowhere near the times that everyone was setting. But Piastri then crossed the line too, and he went only just 3/100ths of a second behind Leclerc. So Piastri was certainly pushing it and looked to be in the fight for pole position.
It looked like the McLarens and well just Lando Norris and the Mercedes
Yeah,
were on used tires too as
yeah,
well, so that could account for the difference. Because Piastri was just 26 thousandths away from Charles Leclerc. Sainz was
yeah,
almost 3/10. Verstappen was a tenth and a half away from Charles Leclerc too. So
yeah.
it was a good lap considering circumstances he had this weekend.
Yeah. So as Verstappen set his first competitive lap time, he was just a tenth and a half back. But then as we went to the final set of runs and qualify, Hamilton was actually on two personal best sectors, and he was looking to improve his time, but he only went up into P4. So certainly not the Hamilton we saw in FP1, where we thought he was very comfortable with the car because Verstappen, Piastri, and Leclerc were still ahead of him. But Russell was actually flying. He went fastest in the first sector and a personal best in the middle sector, and so he went up into P3 and a really good result for him. But still, Piastri was up there in second, so Piastri still showing a lot of pace. But Leclerc now was improving on his monumental time that he put in to set pole position originally, and as he crossed the line, he extended his advantage further by 2/10. So now he was a tenth clear of Piastri, and he looked to seal the deal.
It would be a dogfight then from Leclerc, both Ferraris and both
Yeah,
McLarens. Piastri couldn't improve his time at all. Sainz then he went to cut the beam and he was only third, so behind Oscar Piastri. Lando Norris had to settle behind Carlos Sainz, so it was Ferrari, McLaren, and Max Verstappen meanwhile had hit the wall on his lap,
yeah,
and so he wouldn't improve on the sixth place, which was disappointing for him, which
yeah,
meant that Charles Leclerc would take pole position again in Monaco with three poles in Monaco. And I
yeah,
think then he became the active driver with the most poles at Monaco so far.
yeah,
So Leclerc again a really good lap for him. But then we'd just have to wait and see for Sunday because he's taken pole now 3 times, but 2 times he hasn't converted
Yeah.
into victory.
At least now he'll be starting like a dry race on pole position too, and so maybe he could lead it from the front. But we would have to see now as we went to the race, and this race start is really important, especially if you're the top two, because you need to get a really good start, or else you're gonna be under threat, severely behind. So as the lights came on and then they went out, it was a good start from Charles Leclerc, who moved across Oscar Piastri a little bit, but Sainz also looked to get a really good start from P3, and he went down the inside of Piastri at turn one, but Piastri somehow used the outside line, which is more of the racing line, and he was able to gain the momentum to go up into second place. And as they went up Beau Rivage, we saw Sainz had some major damage to his car, and it looked like once again Sainz and Piastri coming together, just as we saw in Miami and a bunch of other times this season. And Sainz was now just holding a train through Casino Square, and eventually the car let go, and he had to go off into the runoff area. So that was a huge blow from Ferrari. But Leclerc now had a comfortable lead with Piastri right on his tail too as they headed into the tunnel. But then as they exited and into the chicane, we saw the red flag brought out. And I thought at first this was because of Sainz. But then we saw the chaos that unfolded behind.
The camera just turned to Beau Rivage, and you just see
Yeah,
what you assume to be just a block of
yeah,
debris, and then you realize it's just what's left of Sergio Perez's Red Bull
yeah,
after absolutely everything just got ripped off it.
yeah,
And we look back to the onboards for what happened with that crash. So basically, Perez was going up Beau Rivage, and Kevin Magnussen was on the inside of him.
yeah.
And Perez saw Magnussen, so I think he tried to squeeze out Magnussen,
Yeah, he
but
thought Magnussen would back out of it.
but that's the false thinking because Magnussen never backs out of anything.
Yeah,
And I think it was just stupid from K Mag though, because like the wall narrows in.
yeah,
And even though Perez saw it, Magnussen, like I know Perez was trying to squeeze him out and probably should have given more space, but K Mag just never backs out, and so he stuck his nose in there, and already on 10 penalty points he did a crazy move, and so that spun Perez,
and
and like
Hulkenberg too got collected. I felt bad for him.
exactly, and initially it looked like the crash wouldn't be that big or the damage wouldn't be that big for that type of crash, but then you realize um he spun out and then he hit the wall
Yeah,
hard sideways, and then he did like a 180 into Nico Hulkenberg,
yeah,
and so Hulkenberg's car ripped off what was left of Perez's car, and then it just left Perez's monocoque there, and both Haas cars just out of the race, and just after being disqualified from qualifying for the technical
yeah.
infringements, just completely ruining their weekend, and I think it was just unnecessary from Kevin Magnussen.
Yeah, also what was unnecessary was Esteban Ocon's like really stupid move where he tried to go down the inside of Pierre Gasly and ended up at Portier. He got launched up by his teammate because he just squeezed out Gasly after unnecessarily just diving down the inside, and that was Ocon's race done and dusted. So it was just an unnecessary move for 1 point for P10 in the race, and now he was out of the race where no points he could score at all. And this had some serious backlash within the team because this isn't the first time those two have come together. And like if you know about the history between Ocon and Gasly, how they've not been friends at all, coming through the junior categories and getting up to Formula One. So this had some serious repercussions with the team. And there's a lot of rumors flying around that he might be benched for Canada, but we'll have to see.
And Ocon obviously just with all his teammates has never been
Yeah.
the kindest, especially with Sergio Perez
And
and
Alonso.
Fernando Alonso. He couldn't do it with Ricardo because Ricardo was always too far ahead of.
Yeah.
No, but Ocon really just races his teammates harder than he races opponents, which
Yeah.
is something you don't want as like a team manager. But
Yeah.
then going on to the second restart after they had to repair the damage and
Hmm.
to the barrier and clear Perez's car, it was another good start from Charles Leclerc, and it was a better start for Oscar Piastri as he protected his P2 into Sandoval Norris tried to go around the outside of Carlos Sainz, but Sainz held him off, and it put Norris under pressure to the Mercedes of George Russell. It was Verstappen couldn't make any more moves, and Hamilton was right behind him, and they all made their way safely through the first couple of corners. And in the background, we saw Daniel Ricciardo lose out a place to Fernando Alonso, and so that was like the only change that happened on the opening lap. And so it was from this point onward that the race took a weird turn, because under red flags the drivers all changed their tires and
Yeah.
therefore fulfill the requirement for a dry race where you have to run two different types of tire compounds. So for this whole race it was just managing tires to the end. And
Yeah.
which for the hard tire guys was a bit better. For the medium tire guys, they were driving slower than the F2 cars.
Yeah, drive like as we saw on lap 33, just a huge train formed between Lance Stroll or between Fernando Alonso, and we had Ricardo, Sargent, and the two Saubers behind. So it was just people trying to conserve their tires. And we saw on lap 43, finally, Stroll came into the pit to change onto hard compound of tires. So the medium guys were just managing their tires throughout, and it made for a very boring race because people like you can't pass with how big these cars are. So yeah,
We saw we saw Albon trying to get past Sonoda a lot of times, and we saw Ricardo tucked
yeah,
up behind Alonso for like the whole race. And so none of those guys both know how to overtake very well, just could not find a way past anyone in
yeah,
Monaco. But Stroll, after having pitted on lap 50, he hit the wall. I think he hit the wall and his tire just got a puncture. So he hit the wall at the Nouvelle chicane, and his left rear tire got a puncture, and so he had to pit. And meanwhile,
yeah,
then we were seeing the first couple of overtakes. We saw
yeah,
Valtteri Bottas finally pull off a race overtake, and it was on Logan Sargent, who
yeah.
loved getting overtaken at Mirabeau in the two races he's had in Formula One here.
Yeah, it was a good opportunistic move from Bottas, and then we saw Stroll use the new soft tires that he pit for to get past Sargent, and it was actually a really good move at Sandoval turn one. He just did a lovely switchback on Sargent and was able to drive off into the distance.
And that's the thing, because they were driving so slowly
Yeah.
that these guys who were just able to make a pit stop just easily caught back up to the back of the pack.
Yeah, on lap 70 though, we saw Sargent do a opportunistic move on Zhou Guanyu. He used the back marker of one of the McLarens and he just followed them through and was able to get past Zhou Guanyu at Mirabeau. So it was a really good opportunistic move from him.
hmm And then the race order kind of stayed the same, as no one could
Yeah,
find a way past. But then out front on lap 78, Charles
yeah,
Leclerc, who said he was crying on the last two laps, he managed to finally keep it all together and win the Monaco Grand Prix for the
yeah,
first time in his career. And like Alex Jake said, for the first time in 93 years, a Monaco driver has won the Monaco Grand Prix. And
yeah,
so a great result for him to finally break that Monaco curse and win his not only his home race, like the Monaco Grand Prix, just everything
yeah.
about it makes it so special for him.
Yeah, but also I want to give a huge shout out to Oscar Piastri, who drove a brilliant race and was able to come away with P2 in the end and a super drive. And he drove incredibly all the weekend, so he definitely deserves that podium. And Carlos Sainz, boy, did he get lucky with that red flag and the way it worked out. He got to restart in the original starting position. So even though Sainz was at the back of the field during the red flag, he was able to go back up to third because they hadn't completed a sector yet.
Not the
Or
whole grid hadn't completed the
yeah,
first sector yet, so they went back to the original start order,
yeah,
minus the drivers who crashed out. So, but I think going back to Piastri, I think he's driven like that all season, and so he
yeah,
finally gets a result that's like
yeah,
worthy of his driving level, and it shows
yeah.
that on his day, like when he's not unlucky, he's like just as quick, and if not quicker than Lando Norris.
I mean, yeah, we've known how quick Piastri is, winning both the Formula 3 championship and the Formula 2 championship in his rookie years. So Piastri, there was no doubt Piastri was a super driver, but he finally now has that bit of luck where he can actually get the result that he deserves.
So Charles Leclerc won the Monaco Grand Prix. Oscar Piastri came on P2, followed by Carlos Sainz. So huge points for Ferrari in the
Yeah.
Constructors' Championship. Leclerc did a huge dent in the Drivers' Championship as well.
Yeah.
So it looked like maybe we have a title fight on. Who knows?
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. Then Lando Norris came fourth. He'll be happy on one hand, but disappointed on the other
Yeah.
hand that he's not on the podium when he's looked so consistent.
Yeah.
Then George Russell came fifth, ahead of Max Verstappen and ahead of Lewis Hamilton. So, Russell, Verstappen, Hamilton were like really all following each other closely, especially when Verstappen came on that late charge
Yeah.
to try to get past Russell on fresher tires. Yuki Tsunoda came eighth, so another just consistently points
Yeah.
for him and RB. Alex Albon came ninth for Williams' first points of the year.
Yeah, really good job from Albon to, I think, move them ahead of Alpine. So Alpine were now struggling, but I think they also they scored with Pierre
'cause Gasly
Gasly.
came 10th.
Yeah, so it was another good point for Pierre Gasly as well. So hopefully Alpine can get their driver situation sorted, and this midfield battle is going to be very interesting come the end of the year. So we'll just have to find out. But that's pretty much it for this episode, and thanks for listening to this episode of our podcast with the very interesting, pretty boring, but overall nice result, Monaco Grand Prix. So thank you for listening, and be sure to join us next time as we take a look at the 2024 Canadian Grand Prix. Thank you.